Alistair asked me if I'd be willing to talk about how I came to faith, I was glad to have the opportunity to share my experience of God's love and care over many years. Although it wasn't until I was in my early 20s that I came to know Jesus in a personal way. Looking back, I can see how God was looking out for me for as long as I can remember. I first became conscious of wanting to know more about Christianity in my early teens. I was living with my parents in a small village on the Yorkshire-Lancashire border. I went to the village church occasionally and was confirmed there, but I knew there must be more to Christianity than I'd experienced so far. The turning point came when I was in my early 20s and working in London. Oh yes, when I was early for an interview at the BBC, I decided to pass the time by going into All Souls Church, which is right next to the BBC, right next to Broadcasting House. And having a look around, I was intrigued by the literature on display in the church, as well as by the beautiful painting of Christ before Pilate hanging behind the communion table. And I decided to go to the service there the next Sunday. I found a large congregation with many young people, very different to the village church where I'd grown up. On my second or third visit, it was a guest service, as they called it. The service was more informal than usual, and the sermon was simply explaining the gospel with an invitation at the end to those who wanted to know more to come forward. This seemed to be just what I had been waiting for, and I quickly went forward, together with several others, where I was introduced to a member of the congregation. We talked for a while and then prayed together. I don't remember exactly what I prayed that night, but from that point on, I began to realize that Christianity is simply Christ, knowing him and following him. I joined a small group with others who'd responded to the invitation that evening, and we met over several weeks to look at some basic Bible passages together. I realized that while I'd known a bit about Jesus as someone who lived a long time ago, it was possible to have a real relationship with him and through him with God our Father. I really can't pinpoint a definite moment when I came to faith. It was more of a gradual process. After that, I joined a regular weekly fellowship group where I made some lifelong friends. I also left the bedsit where I'd been living and went to share a large flat in Swiss Cottage with 4 others from All Souls. It worked really well and we had some great times together. After doing a training course at All Souls, I became a commissioned worker, which was a requirement before you could do any kind of work in the church. Even something like standing at Oxford Circus on Sunday evenings and handing out invitations to a service. Then there were the Billy Graham Crusade meetings at Wembley in 1966, at which I was a volunteer, as were most members of All Souls. I'd had rather a negative feeling about Billy Graham before he came to London, but that changed completely after taking part in the crusade. It was an exhilarating time to be in London when everyone in the city seemed to be talking about Billy Graham. My flatmates and I would pile into a car and drive off to Wembley each evening. I think most, if not all of us, were delegated to speak to people who responded to the invitation to come forward, which they did in their thousands. It was wonderful to be in the stadium each evening and to be part of thousands of voices singing God's praises with songs like Oh Happy Day. The next crusade, which I also took part in, was in Norwich, where I moved in 1988. I love Norwich. I was very reluctant to leave, but it became necessary when my mother needed more care, and I moved to Sheffield in 1991. I grieved for Norwich at first, as I'd really put down roots there, whereas here in Sheffield, I was torn between a demanding new job and trying to care for my mother, still living in Lancashire. However, everything was resolved in the end. And I began to appreciate the merits of Sheffield. Now I'm just very, very thankful to God that he brought me to such a perfect place to live. Looking back, I can see how his plan is always right. He has always been there for me, even when at times I've forgotten him. I haven't always been a faithful follower of Jesus, and I've grumbled when things have seemed hard. But God has never failed to look out for me. Now that I'm older, I've found that I've never lacked anything I really needed, even down to the most mundane detail. More than ever, I'm just so thankful to belong to him and to have such a caring church with Alistair and Catherine in particular. I'm not really eloquent enough to say anything, but thank you, God. Thank you, God.